Let's bring in right now NBC News correspondent Morgan Radford, who recently went inside Maine State Prison and spoke to inmates about their efforts to make their voices heard. Morgan, what did you find out?
It was interesting, Joe. I mean, a lot of people don't even realize, as you mentioned, that this law exists in states like Maine and in Vermont. But this is a topic that's been generating a lot of buzz on the 2020 campaign trail. We heard Senator Sanders say he supports it. Senators Harris and Warren said we're open to having a conversation about it. So we went inside one prison in Maine and we asked them how they feel about this conversation that is now bubbling up to the national level. And you might be surprised, they're paying very close attention.
Foster Bates has been locked up in this maximum security prison for 17 years.
What are you in here for?
I'm here for murder.
And the entire time, he's been a registered voter.
I voted every year there was an election.
You voted in every election since you've been in here.
I've been here.
Nationwide, only 2 states allow prisoners to vote, Vermont and Maine, where felons never lose the right to vote, even while incarcerated. Here, inside Maine State Prison, Bates is the president of a special NAACP chapter that he leads with his vice president, Sam Basu, also convicted of murder.
Doing what I did, I know I deserve to serve time for that.
Together, they help register other inmates to vote.
What is this green form?
That's the voter registration application form.
With more than 2 million people behind bars, the U.S. has the highest prison population in the world, a potential voting bloc bigger than the entire state of New Mexico.
There is so much life happening outside of these walls.
Yes.
Why do you think it's important to vote from within these walls?
Because we are just as much as part of this country as anyone who's outside these walls. Because we're incarcerated doesn't mean that we should lose our right to vote. Because when I leave this facility, I'm a citizen still.
It's an issue that's getting attention from the cell block to the 2020 campaign trail.
But I think the right to vote is inherent to our democracy. Yes, even for terrible people.
Let terrorists that are in prison vote. I don't think so.
For Diane and Jim Gagnon, the issue hits closer to home.
It was a ring that he had on his finger.
Their 25-year-old son was murdered in 1989. The man convicted of killing him is currently serving 30 years in a Maine prison, scheduled to get out just after the next presidential election.
If you had a message to your lawmakers about this right to vote here, what would you say to them?
The only thing I would say to them is my son didn't get a chance to vote. Why would you allow someone that's committed a murder or manslaughter to vote when my son couldn't vote?
It's an argument that these inmates understand.
There's not much you can say to the family as to why this person should vote. But the answer that I would give is that you have to, at some point in time, if that person comes back to society, you want to have a changed person, not the person who committed a heinous crime.
A person who says he's still a citizen, even if it's behind bars.
So, Joe, what's interesting is that NAACP chapter, they registered 230 voters back in the 2016 election. They had their record high when Obama won back in 2008, and that was 300 registrants. But you might be surprised to find out that Bates said that many, if not most, of those voters inside that prison are Republicans, and they voted for Trump.
Mike.
Well, the interesting thing to me is, and it used to be in Massachusetts where prisoners could vote, they can, they shut that down after a furlough program to the Dukakis administration. What issues inside motivate inmates who can vote as opposed to the issues that affect people on the outside in the world?
For those who voted for Trump, for example, the vice president of that chapter, Sam Basu, he said that he voted for Trump and has been a registered Republican all of his life. He said number one was the economy. He felt like that, especially with President Trump, he felt like the economy had a shot, and that's what he wanted to see. Other than that, of course, you can imagine prison reform and things like that. But it also surprised me. Kind of higher on their list were things for those who voted for the Democratic Party, like Mr. Bates. He said climate change. He said education. He said things that I think will help me once I get outside of this this cell block.
Interesting. That's interesting.
And so why is it that we have two New England states right next to each other, being the only two states out of the 50? Any idea?
And I asked that. What was surprising, though, is a lot of the residents don't even know that this exists in their state. So that kind of is what confused me. And there's no telling why. I mean, what's interesting is that Maine is sort of the most liberal in terms of their policy. So, for example, they have a mandatory right to have visitation. And the last time that someone tried to overturn this law was back in 2013, and that was a Republican lawmaker. But because it's written into their constitution as a state, you'd have to have a referendum.
Years ago, Joe, at MCI Concord in Massachusetts, Concord State Prison, it was a minimum security prison back then. I convinced and encouraged a friend of mine, Carl Valecka, who was an inmate, to run for selectman in Concord. And he ran.
Did he win?
And he used to know, but he used to tell people he had a block vote, cell block.
Cell block vote. Oh my gosh. All right. Thank you so much. NBC's Morgan Radford. We greatly appreciate you being here. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.